All right, everybody, what's going on? And welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk. This is the show we cover the SWAC inside and out. I'm your tour guide around the SWAC Sea Wells coming at you. And today we're going to talk about the leading returning rushers for the 2024 season. We got a few guys who were in the mix in terms of top 10 rankings in the SWAC in rushing yardage and yards per game and touchdowns. So we got some guys coming back who have done some work. We've got a couple teams who not returning as much production. So we're just gonna kind of run down the list of guys for each team, the leading rusher for each team coming into the season, um, with a caveat that I always try to do some research and look before I do these lists. But sometimes guys, you know, so some of these rosters don't always be as accurate. So sometimes a guy might have went in the portal already. So if that's the case, man, just say yo, he in the portal, and we'll move on. This is not about who your team is bringing in. So even if your team bringing in a guy that ran for 1,500 yards somewhere, he's not going to be on this list. This is for guys that played this past season on this particular team. So whether you got to transfer from out of the SWAC, which nobody does, but if you got a leading rush out of somewhere, that guy's not going to be on this list. Um, your all everything transfer guys not going to be on this list. Your incoming top freshman not going to be on the list. This is strictly guys who have played last season at this school and are the leading guy coming back. Simple and plain. So with that being said, man, y'all make sure y'all hit those socials: Facebook at Swag Talk, Instagram Swag Talk, Twitter Swag Talk 76. Um, like the video, comment, and share it. Also, hit that subscribe button. We're continuing to grow, so I thank y'all for subscribing. If you're a new subscriber, thank you. If you're thinking about it, thank you anyway. Go ahead and hit that button, man. It don't cost you nothing. Hit that button and then hit that notification bell so you can be alerted to anytime videos drop. I typically drop on Wednesdays and Sundays, but sometimes I drop on other days. And of course, we have Swag Smoke live on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. So that's how our schedule lays out. We'll start to do our 12 team previews coming up probably really soon. I mean, media day is next month, so we'll start to roll those out soon. I'll have once I put together my schedule, I'll have it on my social so you can see that and know when your favorite team's preview is coming. So football is almost here, man. Like I say, we kind of like in that time period. You got WNBA, you got basketball, you got baseball going on, College World Series. So football is starting to come around. This is almost that summer doldrums, is the Olympics this year. So there are some things going on, but football is right around the corner. So y'all make sure y'all keep it locked here, and we're gonna cover all the SWAC action that we have. So let's go ahead and get started with this, man. We're gonna run down team by team. We'll start off with the Bulldogs of Alabama A&M, and I'm on a crusade this season to give props to that Bama A&M offense, man. I keep saying it every time they come up. I don't think a lot of people recognize how solid this offense was last season. Obviously, the record wasn't good, and Coach Maynard's on the hot seat, but the offense was not the problem. They returned one of the top backs in the conference, Donovan Eaglin. He's a guy that I love a lot as a back and as a guy. I think he's a great young man. He's a really good running back. He's been productive in his 2 seasons at Alabama A&M. This past season, he finished fourth in the league with 75.6 yards per game on the ground. Also, he finished the season with 765 yards on the ground, 142 carries, averaged 5.4 yards per carry, and 7 touchdowns. Had a long of 67, and he played in 10 games. He was kind of banged up earlier in the season. They tried to manage him a little bit, but he's a guy that can go for 100, 150, 200 in a game, when he gets the carries. He's a guy that can be a game breaker, and you definitely returning a guy like that, also returning Ryan Morrow and Xavier Langford gives Bama A&M a great backfield when it comes to running the ball. Can they stay clean and not turn the ball over as much and maintain a level of consistency? That's for another discussion. But this guy is one of the top backs in the league. Like I say, he was fourth in the league in rushing yards per game this past season, and he was also fourth in the league in total yards. So he's he's the top guy, and he carries the ball quite a bit. Had 142 carries this season. So our next guy is from Bama State, and that's Marcus Harris. He was the second leading rusher on his team last season. He had 87 carries for 331 yards. He's a redshirt junior. He had 331 yards, averaged 3.8 yards per carry, four touchdowns, had a long of 48, averaged 36.7 yards per game. He played in 9 games. Like I said, this is an offense that obviously was not that great. I mean, he finished the season as the 17th leading rusher in the conference in total yardage, and he finished 16th in yards per game. So he was a guy who did made the most of his carries, less than 100 carries, but he was able to be pretty solid there. And like I said, he was the second leading rusher. The leading rusher had 99 carries, so they didn't really give the ball out a lot to guys, but he was able to do something with it, and he had a few big plays here and there for Bama State in a running attack that only averaged 111 yards on the season. So not a lot of opportunities there, but he was able to do some things with the chances that he had. Alcorn loses a guy like in Jarvion Howard and Jacorian Sewell is a redshirt junior. He is the second leading rusher on the team. He finished with 35 carries for 198 yards, averaged 5.7 yards per carry, um, and he had one touchdown against Southern, and he had 62 yards on as long and 2.8 yards per carry in 7 games. Um, no, not against Southern. I'm thinking about somebody else. But he had one touchdown on the season. 62 yards was his long, average 28.2 yards per carry in 7 games. So a nice, a nice bit of production there. Playing behind a guy that got most of the carries. Your opportunities are really going to be limited, but he was able to tote the rock a little bit, and we expect to see more from him. Next is Bethune-Cookman, and Jimmy Robinson III is the guy who is the leader rusher returning for them. He didn't have the greatest season, especially when you look at in terms of explosive runs. His longest run on the season was 25 yards. Now, their offense was hit or miss on the ground. They averaged 125 yards per game as an offense, and only 3.4 yards per carry. So you kind of expect the guys individually to fall in that realm. And he was one of those guys. He averaged over 50 yards per carry, 50 and a half, which was ninth in the league. But he only averaged 3.6 yards per carry on the season and had two touchdowns. He had 556 yards on the season, which was also ninth in the league. So he was a top 10 guy in terms of yards and yards per game. Like I said, didn't have a lot of explosive runs. His long was 25. Didn't have the best yard per carry average and only had two touchdowns. But the offense really did not move the ball that well on the ground last season. He's a guy who you can give him the ball a lot, and he can grind out yardage. I mean, he had 153 carries on the season, which which was the third most in the season in the conference, and the top number for a returning running back. So he can carry the ball a lot, and they weren't afraid to give it to him a lot. You would love to see his numbers go up, especially if he's getting that amount of carries. When you look at the guys who had more carries than him, they had over 200 yards more than him at least. Howard had 785, and Owens had 1,369. So you see guys carrying the ball over 150 times, 200 times. They had 5.1 and 6.8 yards per carry, respectively. So you kind of want to see that number go up, which means you want to kind of see some longer runs. When he runs the ball, and this offense is people say it's going to be better. Will he be the guy to carry that load, or will they split it with guys, or what? We'll see when that happens. Next is Kelvin Dean from FAMU. He's the second leading rusher on the Rattlers. great back, man. Had a really, really great celebration bowl. Had a couple big touchdowns. He's a guy who can start on the majority of the teams in the league. He's a grad transfer. He finished. He's a graduate student. Excuse me. Finished with 73 carries on the season, 376 yards, averaged 5.2 yards per carry, with three touchdowns. Had a longer 49, averaged 28.9 yards per game, and he played in all 13 games for the Rattlers. Um, I expect FAMU to run the ball a little bit more this season. Um, you got a couple good backs still there, so why not feed them? Especially with a new starting quarterback, why not feed those guys behind that really good offensive line and let them eat, and then let the passing game develop from there. Like I said, losing a guy like Jennings, it hurts, but this guy was just as good. So, I think you're looking at one of the guys who can be considered one of the better backs in the league. My number one back is coming up, but this guy could battle for that spot. I expect a great season out of him, and I think he'll be ranked highly in the conference when the season is over. Um, Next is Grambling. They lost two extremely, extremely, extremely great running backs this past season. You can't talk about who's returning in this case without talking about who left. Um, Chalk and Williams were two great backs. They accounted for over 1,500 yards, 1,569 yards combined, and 15 touchdowns. So those are two guys who both averaged over 5 yards per carry. Um, Chalk was at 5.5. Williams was at 6. Um, they both had pretty nice explosive runs for Longs. 61 for Williams, 49 for Chalk. 64 yards per game for Chalk, 78.6 for Williams. That's a two-headed monster. Young guys at that. Um, you lose that, regardless of who returns, that's a lot of production to replace. Keelan Elder is the third leading rusher. He's the leading returning rusher. He's a guy who's been around a long time. Battled some adversity, but his time is here. Of course, he's going to battle some other guys, but that's a guy who can be steady for your offense. He finished the season with 34 carries, 130 yards, 3.8 yards per carry, and one touchdown. He had a longer 30 on the season and 11.8 yards per game in 11 games. So you can expect, I don't, I anticipate Grambling running the ball still with Coach Dooley, but I think a guy like this who's a vet, you want to lean on him, and take advantage of his experience. This could be his year. So I'm looking for great things out of Keelan Elder. And he's another guy who, like I said, been around a while. I like him a lot. I expect to see some great things out of him. My number one guy in the conference is Irv Mulligan from Jackson State. I think the guy should be the preseason offensive player of the year. He is, to me, the best back that's returning in the conference. He is the when you break it down, he is the leading. Um, he's the second leading rusher in the conference in terms of returning runners in yards at 673. Excuse me, 674 yards per game. He's the leading returning rusher in yards per game at 84.3. He also has five touchdowns. He has a longer 66, 122 carries, 5.5 yards per carry on the season, and five touchdowns. Played in 8 games. If he didn't go down to injury, he's probably 1,000 yard back last season. Um, like I said, I think he has the potential to be 1,000 yard back this season. The offensive gesture is going to be pretty good, so I expect him to get his work as long as he stays healthy. He's the top back in the conference. I don't, I mean, you can say whoever, but that's the guy that I feel like is the top back in the conference. Like I said, he didn't get hurt last season. He has a 1,000 yard season, so I expect that from him this season. Um, and you're really looking at a great guy, a great back, strong runner, tough to bring down. The first man not gonna really get him down, and you can always expect him to fall forward for yardage, which always helps your offense. Getting those extra 2 or 3 yards is the difference between a second and 5 and a 2nd and 8. So 2nd and 5, these are like a 3rd and 1 or another first down on 3rd down. So you really put yourself in great position when you have a back that can really move the ball consistently, and get those tough yards, and then hit for the big play when it's there. That's the kind of back that you really want to build your offense around, and he is that guy right now. Looking at Valley, the Fabian Fant is their returning rusher. He's a senior now. Last season, he had 35 carries for 275 yards, average 7.9 yards per carry. That's the highest per carry rate of anybody on this list, which shows an explosiveness. 2 touchdowns on the season for him. Had a 53-yard run, averaged 34 yards per game in only 8 games on an offense that, you know, no offense to anybody, but that Valley offense just was dreadful last season. Um, so when you have a guy that can do that on an offense that only averaged 89 yards per game and only averaged 2.5 yards per carry, he was able to hit big plays on an offense that could not hit big plays. Valley was the only offense that didn't run for 1,000 yards. Um, they only had 8 touchdowns. He had two of those 8. He had, like I said, he had a almost an 8 yard per carry average. That's almost 4 times higher than the team's average. So he was a guy who was able to have some big plays in an offense that did not have big plays. And of course, he's a guy that a lot of people probably never even heard of because he plays at Valley. But that's a guy that, like I said, I think he's a guy that you can kind of, expect those big plays out of him. Um, from time to time. I don't think he's a guy that, he's not a guy that you can get a ball to all the time. He's 5'8", 180. If you have another guy with him, he can be the lightning to somebody's thunder. And, you want him to kind of get outside and, use his speed and make plays in space. So I think that's the kind of guy that, can be a big play hitter for your offense. And he already did that some on offense that wasn't that good last season. Prairie View loses loses the top 2 rushers. Also, who were 2 of the top runners in the conference this past season. I think Antoine and Johnson, they both were inside the top 15, I think, in yards on the season. Antoine finished 10th, and Johnson was 11th at 543 yards and 469 yards, respectively. Both almost at 50 yards per game. So they both were in the top 11 or so in the conference there. But they return a guy who has some success. Jamarius Brooks, he has 54 carries for 292 yards, averaged 5.4 yards per carry, had 1 touchdown. His touchdown was against Southern. I knew it was one of those purple teams, that guy that got a touchdown against Southern that had only 1 touchdown on the season. Had a longer 46, 32.4 yards per carry, nine games, 32.4 yards per game in 9 games, average 5.4 yards per carry. So they have a new offense, so you can expect to see some parts moving around. I would love to see him in the mix for that position. I think he's a guy who can, he's had some opportunities, and he's made the most of what he's gotten. So I would love to see, him expand his role in the offense. Next is Southern, and Southern returns Kendrick Grimes, who is one of the big play guys. He's a guy who can hit the home run at any time, and obviously when you see a celebration, he hits the home run all the time. But he finished the season with 660 yards. He was eighth in the league in yards. He was also seventh in the league in yards per game at 60. He had a 73-yard run, which was the second longest run by anybody. That's the longest run for a returning guy. Averaged 5.5 yards per carry, had 9 touchdowns, which put him at third in the league in touchdowns, and he is the leading returning guy in touchdowns. Um, he's a guy I like more when he has somebody else to run the ball with a backfield mate. I think he's the type of guy that can be a do it all type of guy. You can spread him out wide. You can use him in the screen game. You can get him the ball outside the tackles. You can get him in space. He can score. I don't think he's the guy that needs to be carrying the ball the bulk of the time for your offense. If you got a kind of bruiser type of guy that can grind out those yards and then bring him in and let him hit for a change of pace, that to me is where he excels. When he has to carry the ball a lot, obviously your rate of a hit declines the more times that you have to carry the ball. And he can fumble from time to time, but I think he's better when he has that opportunity to hit a hole and go. Um, and then once he gets an open field, it's very few people going to catch him. So I like Kendrick Rhymes a lot, and not just because he plays with Southern, but he's a guy I think can be a home run hitter for anybody's team. If you put him behind a great offensive line, he would be a guy that would run for 1,000 yards. He ran for 660 in an offense that was anemic last season, an offense that only had 111 yards per game on the ground. And he had a really great season running the ball for Southern in an offense that everybody knew what they wanted to do. And they couldn't really do a lot, but he was one of the bright spots in that offense. And you can expect to kind of see him continue to develop as he becomes a better back and learns more about the position. Next is Texas Southern. They lose two really good running backs. They lose Ladarius Owens, who was the best back in the league last season, and they lose Ja'Cory Howard, who was also a very steady guy who could have been a starter on a lot of the teams in the conference. They lost a 1-2 punch. But Davion Ford is the leading returning rusher. He only had 19 carries in 4 games at 62 yards, 3.3 yards per carry, with a longer 13 and no touchdowns. Average 5 yards per game. So 15 and a half yards per game. This is an offense that outside of Houston, we don't really know what it's going to be like. I mean, all we know is, they have Jace Wilson and a few other guys coming back, but we don't know exactly where this offense falls. So, I don't know what kind of role that he's going to play in this offense, if any. So, when you lose so much production in your offense on the ground, then you're basically starting over, and that's tough. Like I said, you're losing a guy who almost had 1,400 yards, um, and you're also losing a guy who also had almost 400 yards on the season. So you're losing almost 1,800 yards on the ground between two guys. No one guy is going to replace that. So I always say when you lose big production, you replace it by committee. And I think that's what they're going to do. I mean, Jace Wilson can run the ball a bit. They got a bunch of backs coming in and a few guys that are returning, but they don't have a lot of playing time. So that's where the questions come. But like I said, this new head coach, new system, we'll see how they do, when they get started. Closing out the list is Pine Bluff, and they're led by Jonas Davis. This guy had 160 plus yards in the Southern Heritage Classic against Tennessee State. Went down to injury and never really got right again. He only played in 6 games last season. Ran the ball 70 times for 350 yards, averaged 5 yards per carry with one touchdown, had a longer 26, averaged 38.8 yards per game. Um, like I said, he had a solid outing against Tulsa, nothing great, but their offense showed some flashes in that game. Like I said, he had 167 yards against Tennessee State, and then just got hurt and couldn't round back into form. So he's expected to carry a little bit more of the load. They're losing a couple of backs. They're bringing in a couple guys. Um, this offense is in flux. So we'll see how much he gets to carry the load. How his health is. Can he carry the load? Is he going to be a guy that goes down to nagging injuries a lot? We'll see how they do. But the even though it's a small sample size, the opportunity for production is there. I mean, 167 yards is nothing to sneeze at in a against an FCS opponent. I don't care who it is. Is that in an FCS opponent, there's there's nothing that's nothing to sneeze at. So the opportunities are there. If the offensive line can block and his offense can develop, I think that this is a guy who can be a solid contributor. Now, Pine Bluff has some great backs, even though their team hasn't always been that good. They had Taylor Porter a few years ago. They had Kayvon Britton in 22, who was one of the better backs in the league. So having a good running back on this team is nothing unusual. So I wouldn't be surprised if Davis was that guy. If Davis was the guy to kind of get some things going for this offense, because they're gonna have to be able to run the ball. I don't know how great the passing game is gonna be. Yes, they brought in a lot of new receivers, but quarterback play, is always gonna be something to look at. But that's a guy who can help. And that 167 yards that he had against Tennessee State was the sixth highest on the season in conference play, and it was the third highest of a returning guy. So that's a really great game. I mean, you look at it, that's a really 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 good game. Um, not very many people even approach that. So with the opportunity is there, you can kind of look at him for the possibility to make that happen again. So I like him for that, and I'm expecting a lot out of him as long as he's healthy. So that's gonna do it for today's show, man. We got Swag Smoke coming at y'all tomorrow, live 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern, and we all know how we get down there. So y'all keep it locked in with us and keep it rocking with us, and we'll catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.